Hey there, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend, Daniel Miessler. So, Daniel, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I've been in security for a couple decades now. My background is security testing, mostly a lot of consulting in there. Worked at some cool companies, and as of like 5 months ago, I went independent and have been focused on like the intersection of like AI and security.
Which I've really enjoyed because you've been putting a lot more blog posts and other thought pieces, and it's been very cool to watch. But yeah, hey everyone, my name is Clint. I'm the head of security research uh, at Semgrep. Also, I write the TLDRSec newsletter, which you can feel free to check out. So today, Daniel and I are going to be chatting about AI, where it's headed, as well as what it means when applied to cybersecurity specifically. So first, I thought we could start off at a little bit high level. So yeah, how has your opinion on AI changed over the past few years?
I would say it's changed quite significantly as of like mostly as of around November of last year, obviously because of ChatGPT, and specifically because of Transformers and what they've done. Turns out they were actually already pretty good, but Sam Altman had the idea to put a chat interface on top of it, and that's what kind of blew up the world. But I would say that prior to that, the intersection of AI and security was a little bit of a joke. It was like a promising thing that vendors kept talking about and saying, we have AI, it can automate this, it could supplement your user base or whatever. And the meme, I think, was that there were always humans in the background. Whenever they said it was AI, it was just like this giant army of people somewhere on the planet actually doing the manual work that required humans. So I felt like it was kind of like crypto up until like November, and then all of a sudden it became very real.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, whenever I would say, yeah, 5, 10 years ago, whenever any vendor was like, "Oh, AI powered whatever," I'm like, it's probably mostly hype. Yeah, and I think most, maybe not most, but at least a significant percentage of people were, uh, yeah, not necessarily believing that AI magic actually added any user value to the product. And yeah, was probably a large group of contractors somewhere uh, cheap, but. Um, yeah, I think one thing you called out, ChatGPT, sort of the very approachable interface. I think that's interesting. I remember watching an interview with Sam Altman, and he said, like, yeah, we had these like amazing models that could do all these incredible things, and but there wasn't like this big sort of seismic shift in the industry or people using it, and then all of a sudden with ChatGPT, which really just made a thing that's already there just more accessible, caused like this flurry of innovation and I think meaningfully shifted people's perception about what the state of the art was. So I found that very interesting because it's like the tool's already there, but now all of a sudden just like making it slightly, or I would say I guess drastically easier to use, kind of changed everything more than even improving the model itself in a way.
Yeah, I think there's a great lesson there for people building tech. It's like you can have the most amazing thing in the world, but it's if it's not interactable, is that even a word? I'm not sure. If it's not
Mhm, mhm.
accessible to people, um, it won't be used, right? And I think you have a lot of problems like that with some early engineering focused startups where they're building the tech, they're not thinking about marketing, they're not thinking about UI, UX. Um, and yeah, that's all he did. He slapped an interface onto it and it literally blew up.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is an interesting lesson for us, especially in the security field, because I think we tend to focus on the technical aspect, like what's like, the most fully featured, most robust, most complex and flexible security tooling we can build, when in reality, perhaps something that does less but is dead simple for anyone to use might even be more valuable in practice.
Yeah.
Because I guess like you think of like the skill distribution of the industry, like it's always like a bell curve, right? So if you can make the most junior people more effective, that's probably or could be higher leverage than making the very, very good people even better. But I think we'll get into that later also, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Um, so another thing that I saw you write about recently, talking about AI assistants, you actually also discussed in a book you wrote a number of years ago. I think you called them daemons at the time. But yeah, so for uh, people who haven't read the book or haven't heard of this, I was wondering if you could share a little bit, because I think it's kind of neat that you were sort of proposing a cool way of interaction or a way like tech may head a number of years ago that actually seems more and more feasible today. And maybe we even see some companies starting to try to do it.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. So the idea is basically, I called it universal demonization, and the idea is basically everything has an API, which is a little bit like Internet of Things. In fact, the book is called The Real Internet of Things, and the idea was it wouldn't just be like objects like toasters or whatever, but it would be like objects like businesses and objects like people. So everyone would have these daemons, and then a really important component of that would be a local, or it would seem local at least, personal assistant or a digital assistant that's on your device, or it behaves as if it's on your device, and it knows everything about you and it knows your preferences and everything. And based on that, it would interact with all these daemons that are around you. So it would know what you wanted from life. It would know what your goals were, and it would be advocating on your behalf 24/7. While you're sleeping, it's collecting news articles. When you're walking down the street, it's ordering food for you. It's reserving a place in the restaurant. It's changing the channel on the TV you're about to go sit in front of. Um, it's researching work that you have to look up, and it's summarizing it for you. So that was the idea of like this continuous advocate, and that it was using all these daemons around it to advocate on your behalf.
Nice. Yeah, yeah, that's super cool. So you have it knows everything about you. Everything else has an API, and it's just sort of communicating with everything to try to, I guess, like optimize your experience in a way.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. Or like further your goals, like, and the better you enunciate what those goals are, the better job it can do. And the way that's sort of coming to pass now is like that. This is what I'm building in my own tech is like, um, basically providing LLMs context, such as goals and stuff like that, where you give it goals and you ask it to do something, and it gives you answers in the context of those goals. And that's how it's sort of starting to happen. And we're seeing a lot of companies come out now that are building these digital assistants. And of course, they're asking for a lot of this context. So it's kind of starting to happen.
yeah, yeah, which I'm sure is very gratifying to be like, aha, it's happening.
Yep.
Um, I think another example you gave when we were hanging out one time that I thought was very cool is, let's say you're at a coffee shop or something like that, and it's maybe doing a little bit of a sort of like a dating advocacy for you. If there's if you happen to be single, someone else there happens to be single, and maybe you have some shared interests or something like that.
Mm.
That maybe there would be some like discussion amongst the daemons about if you two should talk. I don't know. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. I think we riffed on it for quite some time. Yeah, the idea is that, like, okay, you're single, you're looking for a love or whatever, you're looking for a partner. Well, it knows that you love hiking. It knows that you love Tolstoy. It knows that you love baking. It knows all these different things about you, right? And then what's interesting about this is I see it as interactive and personal. It's not like Internet of Things, which sounds kind of dry, but it's like this thing is advocating for you on your behalf, and it's looking all around you. It's looking at the order at the Starbucks. It's deciding to order the scone for you because it knows you want it. But more importantly, it notices that there's someone standing next to you who also has their daemon listening, and they have listed Tolstoy, they have listed hiking, they have listed scones, and maybe you're both shy, but maybe the two daemons start talking, and they're arranging like opening statements. They're arranging, hey, we're going to order a coffee for the other person. We're going to reserve a table if that exists in the store. So it's like conniving to try to arrange some sort of romance for the principals. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Um, I could see how that would be mm, like it could come off as very like I don't know, techno futurist and maybe more tech than like human focused, but I could see like if it's really like if it understands like your goals and your values and you're like, oh, well, I'm wanting to start a family and have like a life partner and like here's like values that are important to me that have been passed down maybe from my parents or family or these are things I believe in. Like I could see of that um, in a way being a more like deep, potentially like human connection than just something that's I don't know, just based on like, I like superficial things. Like it could be like a deeper personality compatibility type match in theory.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could provide a score or something like that. And I mean, I could argue both sides of this. I could argue the side of like, oh, great, we more crutches, more tech crutches used to supplement when we need human interaction. Because what the person should have done is looked over and said, hey, hello, how are you? Right. But the reality is, a lot of people aren't going to do that. And maybe if we have tools that help it happen, then all the better.
Hmm. Yeah, that additional sort of like real life friction or things like that. There was actually a talk by Esther Perel, the famous relationship therapist. She has like a podcast and books, but she gave a talk at South by Southwest, I think called "The Other AI," which she calls artificial intimacy, about how on social networks. You have like lots of friends or lots of likes or lots of engagement, but it's not maybe like true friendship or true connection.
Yeah,
And she talks about how tech, in a lot of ways, reduces friction, which is convenient, but there is perhaps I think she argued some value in that friction, or there like we lose something when everything is like, you don't have to wait for the bus. You just call a car to your house. You don't have to go out to a restaurant where you could potentially meet people. The food comes right to your house. And
sure.
anyway, we can maybe link to it in the show notes, but I thought that was interesting as well. Um,
Yeah, I think that's very true. Like the friction does have value. And again, that's the type of thing that you could add as an input into the DA. It's like I want prompts. I don't want full assistance. That sort of
Yeah, I like how you're like, yes, I'll take that and put it in the model.
thing.
No
Exactly.
problem.
It's like we need less tech. It's like great point. I'll put that in the tech.
Yeah. Um, Continuing on the trend of like some of your writing, there's been a couple of things recently that you shared that I thought was cool that I wanted to call people's attention to. One of them being SPQA, or you said, this AI architecture that's going to, in your view, replace a lot of existing software. So I was curious if you could maybe define what that means and, yeah, just give people sort of a short, high level intro so then maybe they can read more about it after.
Yeah, sure. So SPQA stands for State Policy Questions and Actions. And it's basically what I believe to be the new model for software. I think all existing software is going to get eaten by this. And specifically, it's not SPQA that's going to eat it, it's LLM based software. So it's essentially LLMs, large language models, the current GPT based AI stuff, with tons of context wrapped around it. And then really good questions coming into it, which result in actions. And what I think is really fascinating about this is that I think what happens is software verticals get uh, basically removed. Instead of having HR
Mm.
software, what you'll have instead is LLM based software with HR context existing inside of it. And then you ask HR questions. So what used to be HR software, you now ask HR questions and you get HR answers back. You could do the same thing with security. You could have a whole bunch of stack information, OS query, stack traces, logs, and everything, and you can ask pen testing questions. And what do you know? You've got pen testing software. So I think that is where things are going. And same with digital assistants. You just ask digital assistant questions and it gives you digital assistant answers. But it's really all the same exact thing, which is LLMs plus context plus questions and actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I found so interesting about that is that I think you made the argument that yeah, if you reduce like all software down to sort of its fundamental components, you have yeah some like state of the world, something that ideally you want to be true or something you're aiming towards. Maybe you're in order to do that, you're asking some questions of it and then taking some action based on the answers of those. And I thought that was like a really elegant yeah sort of distillation like because you can think of it sort of more complexly but sort of fundamentally I feel like those are some of the sort of um, atoms or like non-reducible sort of components
Sure.
um, and I think one argument you made is that um, so with current software you can uh, like everything that it does has to be specifically codified. It's like
Yes.
okay you need to be able to like for each question you're trying to ask basically that's maybe like a separate SQL query or a separate like API endpoint or something that is hand implemented by people and if you want something to do something that's not that then it generally can't do that very easily whereas with this it basically assuming it has all the data you need to answer the questions or take the actions you have of it it can do like infinite things that are not imagined by sort of the creator.
Yeah, that's right. So if you imagine something like a human and you want to build a digital assistant database, the way I think of databases is like they're crystalline. And same with queries, they're also crystalline in the sense that they're fragile and very perfectly defined. Like if you chip off an edge, it's broken. And if you change a crystalline structure, by definition, you're kind of breaking it. And you have to build a new one. So a schema is crystalline, right? Of course, you can update it, you can change it, but it won't be happy about it. And queries have to perfectly match the schema, otherwise you get back the wrong thing or garbage or nothing at all. With LLMs, it's not like that. You say, okay, this is about a human. Okay, cool. What do? We put in journal entries, diary entries. We put in conversations with therapists. We put in likes and dislikes, interviews, bookmarks. You can just drag random things in there, and then you can ask any question you want in natural language. And it's way more powerful than a crystalline schema on the back end.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. How do you propose handle some of the like non-determinism or sort of opaqueness of LLMs? Because say traditional software, even if it is sort of crystalline, maybe like fragile, can't do sort of a broader set of things that weren't intended, but it's sort of deterministic, and you know why it does a thing, um, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the current models are actually really, really good at explaining themselves. So I do this all the time. I say in a security context, is this malicious? Yes or no, and explain why you believe so. And it's fantastic at giving answers. In terms of determinism, there's one trick that a lot of people don't know, which is to turn the temperature down to zero, and it gives very repeatable answers. It doesn't mean they're right, but it does make it repeatable. But I
Mm-hmm.
think this is about to be a very solved problem. I think there's about to be sort of like sidecars anchored onto results, which are basically multiple sets of checks to determine whether or not that answer is good. Like behave like a librarian and check this answer. Look this up on Google and check the answer. And then those will just like run automatically whenever a certain type of result is given. And then it'll give some sort of rating of like, here's our confidence level that this is true.
Yeah, yeah. I saw a few academic papers where basically, yeah, there was like a couple of LLM personas, even if it was the same model that was like, one like, hey, you're a doctor, make a diagnosis, and then it's like, oh, you're a medical researcher, evaluate the diagnosis that this doctor made,
Yes.
and give like a detailed plan for how to improve it. And even it was basically the same model, just one of them had like a different persona and like a different prompt, and then I guess taking the sort of output of one as like the input for the other. Um, but I think from what I saw, it seemed like it like meaningfully improved the output success by like maybe double digit percent or something, in
Yeah.
terms of like as rated by like human reviewers.
Sure. And that'll vary widely from like the type of question, the type of subject matter and everything. But yeah, I think that's the answer. I think this stuff is just going to be built in to these tools. Maybe not the models themselves, but into the tools that wrap around them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for a couple of the current challenges, um, that some people are posing about LLMs, you're like, probably either in the tooling around it or the models themselves. You're like, this is probably not going to be a long term issue. Is your hypothesis?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, keep in mind in internet time, uh, this whole thing happened basically last weekend. Like this is brand new tech. It just came out. I mean, the iPhone's been around since 2007. The internet's been around forever. Um, this popped in November, and people are kind of laying the track as they're running at full speed. And so when people look at something that just exploded, brand new, and they're like, I don't know, I just don't see the maturity around it. It's like, yeah, because it's happening right now. So I think these things are going to be put in place very, very quickly.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I think I seen some charts about like the rate of publication of AI papers, and it's like exponential.
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, yeah. I feel like we were chatting once recently, and you were like, "Yeah, it's been a few days since I have caught up on all the AI news, so I feel like I'm like 3 months behind."
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Taking a weekend off. Yeah, you're 2 years behind now.
Yep. I'm a boomer. It's like I got to find out what all the kids are doing these days since last Friday.
Yeah, totally. Um, well, awesome. Yeah, so that's so we've been chatting about some like high level, big picture AI stuff. So let's focus in on security. So maybe to start out, what areas of security do you think are most likely to be disrupted by AI?
I think most likely are the types of tools that are doing the basic analysis of like, is this bad and how do I fix it? Which unfortunately is like most security software. Um, so evaluating vulnerabilities, evaluating code, evaluating attack surfaces like open ports, um, listening services, listening applications. I think there is massive, massive room for improvement using these sorts of technologies in that existing software. And that type of software is likely to move to like this LLM powered or even LLM based models.
Hmm. So just to dig into that a little bit, you talked about like open ports and services and things like that. Do you mean like replacing a Nmap or a nuclei or tool like that, or rather providing guidance and context on top of the results of the existing tools that can sort of physically gather that data?
Yeah, it would be adding the results of the tools into the context. So, for example, I have this company. It's a biotech company. It's out of Redwood City, California. They have this many employees. They're trying to make this whatever secret sauce thing it is. And here's the results of their attack surface evaluation. It's got these ports, these applications, blah, 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 these websites with these vulnerabilities. Um, what should I fix first as a defender? Or if I'm an attacker, how would I attack it to do harm to it? So it's that sort of analysis, tangible analysis done to existing results. It's not like tooling to do scans. We have plenty of tools to do that.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, so that kind of gets back to what you were talking about before with SPQA and having sort of the data and the context about the organization. Um, so you'd rely on tools to sort of like gather the sort of the data or the context about these are the listening services and ports. But in terms of helping, say, a AppSec or CloudSec team who has limited people, limited resources, what to focus on, that I think you said like analysis or sort of reasoning could be more LLM than a separate standalone piece of software.
That's right. And what's so crazy about this is the more context you have, or the better context you have, the better it gets. So, for example, if you only have the external port scans and the external open applications, well, you can do some cool stuff with that. You could be like, okay, match that up with some threat intel on UCVs or whatever, and it could give you a prioritization based on that. What if you have like the AWS configs in some sort of consumable format that maps this listening port to this machine, which is associated with this code repo, which this team is known for submitting vulnerabilities into? Or there's a vuln management tool that's already found vulnerabilities in those. So what if we can now link a broken piece of code to an application which is linked to that open port? Well, how do you do that? You do that with context. You do that by dropping those individually into a location and having the LLM connect the dots and say that external thing is this internal thing which has a vulnerability. Therefore, that's what you fix first.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. Service that's internally only facing with critical, like maybe you should do it at some point versus anyone on the internet can reach this thing. And yeah, it's like RCE trivially or something like, we should do that immediately.
Yeah, and what's interesting is this is what everyone's been trying to do for the last 15, 20 years inside of vuln management. Like if you look at Orca and Sneak and all these different tools, Wiz, they're all trying to tell the story of here's how bad it is because of this, because of that. That's what LLMs excel at. They can give you a story of this is the worst, and it's higher rank than this because of the following reasons. And it could piece all that stuff together again without doing static queries, without doing a static database update, without running a different interface or anything. You just ask a better question with better context and you get better answers.
Yeah, and you could even say sometimes a company will do like a quarter or a half year sprint to be like, hey, we really care about let's say container vulnerabilities this quarter. Like, let's really ship as secure containers as we can, or like let's focus on XSS this quarter, or things like that. So by um, sort of gathering all the data and being able to ask arbitrary questions of it, that would allow you to. I'm thinking of this as like you would be basically expressing your policy to the LLM in terms of like these are the things I care about most this quarter, which could be arbitrarily different next quarter, and that as long as you were still gathering the data, that would still that flexibility would be straightforward. You wouldn't have to rely on the vendor to enable that functionality for you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like you could do that by department. You could do that by like, hey, I'm trying to eliminate this entire vuln class. What are my steps that I need to take? Um, yeah, just exactly as you said. The flexibility is there for you to sort of steer it in the direction you want to go.
Yeah. Do you think there's so we've been talking about there's a lot of value like once you have all this data and context of different questions you can ask, but what about the actual gathering the information itself? Because I feel like in a medium to large size company that can actually be pretty non-trivial, and can take maybe even an entire team or teams like quarters or years to actually build that visibility and like gathering that data robustly, consistently, setting up, I don't know, ETL pipelines, like whatever. um, so yeah, what are your thoughts on being able to robustly and reliably gather this data in the first place? Like,
Yeah,
do LLMs have a role in that, or like this seems like a hard, semi unsolved problem to me, or at least every company has a bespoke thing.
yeah. Excuse me. There's a couple things there. One is getting the org to define goals and like what they're trying to do. That is a really hard problem and it's unsolved. I do think that this will help because it's so easy to simply write a text document, which is what I'm doing. I'm just writing text documents of like, here are the goals, um, and making like very human observations, like, oh, we need to fix our SQL injection in our user acquisition form or something. Um, and that right there could be just propagated across the rest of the tech stack when you ask vulnerability questions, for example, or prioritization. Um, so in one sense, that gets a little bit easier, but you still have to do that hard work. The other piece is the difficulty of actually getting the tech output into the context of the LLM. And this is where most of the tech innovation actually needs to be done because it's that's going to be hard to do in a usable way. So, for example, I just took the output of Kaido logs, which is like a burp competitor, and dropped a JSON file into embeddings to see if I can query the LLM. The LLM completely lost its mind. It freaked out. I haven't checked my OpenAI bill, but I have a feeling it just had a massive burst when I ran this thing.
Mm,
I think it probably ran hundreds of queries against OpenAI to try to
wow.
answer a question about what was in that JSON file because it was multiple megabytes. So what we
Mm,
have to do is find a way to compress gigabytes and terabytes and petabytes of data down into something that can be consumed by the LLM. And that is a tech challenge that thousands of companies are going to be working on. So I'm not too worried about that in the long term, but in the short term, you have to be very careful about that compression because when you do compression, of course, you're losing something. So you got to make sure you're keeping the right things. The other thing to say real quick is that the answer is to just take the native tool output. You don't have to like in kind of business intelligence, which I did at Apple. You kind of have to build these elaborate pipelines, kind of like those crystalline queries that have perfect data coming in, and you have the receiver is ready for that perfect structure. Here, you don't need that so much. Here, you can consume any text as long as it's not too big to overwhelm a vector database or an LLM itself.
mm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Um, yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking more about like how to have the LLMs deal with so much data. Yeah, I mean, like context windows are getting bigger. I think like Claude said like 100K tokens or something. But even that obviously is not going to be gigabytes or terabytes of data, which many organizations have. Um,
Well,
hmm,
yeah, per day, right? A lot of them are doing that per day. So how are we parsing that and looking for changes? Like it's non-trivial.
yeah, yeah. I wonder. I'm just sort of spitballing here, but I wonder if like one approach would be you take like you still store all the data. Like let's say like you don't throw anything away and you store it in some sort of like security data lake. So like it's all there. And then maybe for specific use cases or questions, you uh, so like LLMs are pretty good at like sentiment analysis or like sort of classifying things. So you could say like, okay, well, here's like one like type of query or type of question we're going to be asking regularly. So let's take this data source and do like almost a pre-processing filter to be like, um, I don't know, extract some like rather than the raw text, like some like features almost from the text
Yes.
and like drastically because it could be like a huge amount of text, but then you could be like like shrink it down to just like these are the only parts that matter for this domain, and then maybe you index that like much smaller thing in I don't know like a vector DB, and then the LLM is like uh, you've done the pre-processing, so it's like 1/100th of like the data size or something maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the direction I'm thinking as well. And I got that idea from the stand a little bit of a
Hmm.
pace personality. And then they just let them interact with each other, and they completely evolved. One of them decided to run for mayor, and it came up with its own campaign slogan and everything. And it proceeded to go and campaign to try to become mayor. I'm not sure if it actually did, but what they had in this paper was a thing called reflection, which I think is the key to this. And I think it's exactly what you were talking about, which is what it did was it had the agents look at a period of their life, like the day or an hour or whatever, and it looked at the events, and then it logged a meaningful encapsulation of that time in relation to its goals. Like, I love nature, or I'm happy to be alive, or wow, it's really fun to give back to the community as a mayor or something. And that would be the one
Mhm.
sentence. And that would be an encapsulation of whatever these 34 events. And I think that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to use more traditional tech to parse down, terabytes of data into, I don't know, 100 lines of text that summarizes it. And then that could be consumed into an LLM.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, maybe there's even a startup or an existing player opportunity for doing that uh, distillation or making it very easy for you to do that. You can imagine like a Snowflake or a similar provider being like, hey, you already put all of your data in here. Here are some like custom functions that you can sort of distill things down based on what's important to you to make it more like LLM friendly.
Absolutely.
Because I don't feel like solutions like that exist right now. Seems like a new space, maybe. I'm not sure.
I'm aware of a couple that are messing with it, but yeah, it's extremely new. It's the roads and bridges. These companies building the roads and bridges of AI. Um, this is the big one, going from multiple terabytes a day into ultimately the real end goal is to crunch a new model every day. So forget vector
Mm,
databases, but you actually just have your own custom LLM with all this stuff baked in. Now that's going to be quite distant because it takes so long and so much money to train these things. But again, I think we haven't even started looking for efficiencies there. I think there's going to be like mini models that could be built very quickly on the most important subset, which could be a collection of these most important reflections. Ultimately, we're going to have like hourly models, and that'll just keep. So when we ask a question, it's going to have the latest stuff from the last hour, but that could take years to get to.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's exciting. Um, okay, so we talked a little bit about what you think is likely to be disrupted by AI within security. What areas of security do you think are not very likely, at least in the short term, perhaps to be disrupted by AI? Or if you think there's some that like, oh, we're never going to get there.
Uh, I don't really see that much that's super safe. I think the safest stuff is physical. So it's like hardware. It's like moving packets from point A to point B. It's, wires, cables, circuits. Like NVIDIA, they're going to be doing fine making GPUs. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and in the physical world, like physical labor, that's not going away anytime soon until robotics come. That'd be another conversation. But I think that that's really the only answer. It used to be the answer of like more creativity or more complex thought, but you add context to LLMs and you could do a lot of that inside of AI.
Yeah, the image generation and things like that. I think a lot of people, including me, expected that to be one of the last refuges from AI, but that actually seems to have been one of the first ones that it does like a really good job at,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, that surprised me as well.
Um, okay, yeah. So, next question: do you think AI is going to augment or replace people, or so augment or replace, or both?
I think the answer is both, definitely. I think it starts with augmentation, then it's replacement, and then it turns into a hybrid. Um, and again, it depends what industry it is, and it depends like the particular role. But I mean, it's already augmenting and it's already replacing. So it's like these trends are happening at different paces inside of different verticals and industries. But yeah,
Mhm.
like ChatGPT on day one was augmentation. Many people who write
Mhm.
like marketing copy or short stories or something, they're actually being replaced. So I would say they're all happening at the same time at different paces.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One thing that I think is interesting to think about is like you could imagine one way of playing out being a very junior SOC analyst now is becomes a bit more effective because maybe there's some sort of custom model trained on observing a bunch of incidents and how to respond to them and how to diagnose like how much we should care about this. So they entry level SOC analyst starts performing like a more mid level or maybe even senior SOC analyst. Or you could imagine a existing very senior analyst now all of a sudden instead of being as good as three juniors they're as good as like 10 juniors in terms of output per unit time or something like that, um, which I think we've chatted about this before. I think is very interesting in terms of like what does that mean for the talent pipeline.
Yeah.
So if like a very senior person can do twice as much as they used to, like do companies just stop hiring junior people because they're like, hey, we can just hire fewer senior people and get more value? Or maybe it allows people with less experience to get into the field more easily because they can ramp up more quickly. So this is not a security example, but I saw a study recently that found that I think some call center employees they had some sort of like custom sort of like a model that was trained on some interactions, basically like how do we maximize sort of the happiness of customers, and they found that we could they could make people who just joined after like a week or two answer questions and help people as well as someone who had already been there 6 or 9 months. So in that case, it's like, oh, this is maybe helping incentivizing hiring more junior people because we can make them as good as a good person quickly. But maybe that sort of weakens the leverage of people who've been around longer, perhaps because they're like more replaceable or less unique.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I saw something on Twitter recently. Can't remember who it was. Basically said that you can't compress experience. Um, there's no compression algorithm for experience. That's what the quote was. And I was like,
Hmm.
actually, an LLM is a compression algorithm for experience. Um,
Definitionally.
yeah, yeah. So it's kind of sad in that way. It's really a bad story for the pipeline for anything. Like in the military, you have a pipeline. You must be an E1 before you can be an E2. You must shovel poop and dig trenches and run wire and do all these lowly tasks. And it's also something I've done work at a large energy company before, a very famous one, and they bounce all their managers that they believe are going to be high performers to all these random different roles like logistics and the mailing system and shipping and digging trenches and doing all these different things. And eventually they're going to sit in some ivory tower and make high level business decisions, but they want them to have all that experience. So the question is, if we're now hiring
Mm.
tier three analysts because we don't need tier one and two, what happens when they retire? How do they become a tier three analyst?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that does to be honest, I feel like I have been stressing about that a bit. Thinking about so for my personal experience as a security consultant, I worked at NCC Group for a number of years, and um, like if you're like even a very like talented, smart, hardworking person right out of school or from some sort of like training program, like it's going to take a while for you to ramp up and be really productive on engagements, which uh, essentially means the firm basically eats the cost of your like healthcare and salary and sort of training you on the job so that in, I don't know, 6 months or a year, you can be like really valuable on client engagements and sort of earning your day rate.
Yep.
But yeah, if there was some sort of like a pen testing automation that could be as good as someone who just started, then yeah, like who, when the senior people retire, who will be the people who will become the senior people from then? Especially security consulting firms tend to, a great place to learn a lot, but a number of people don't choose to stay there for their whole careers just because it can be a sort of a challenging job. Um, so yeah, there kind of needs to be this pipeline of new talent for the industry to persist.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm worried about that. Back to the tech solution again. I wonder if the I wonder if the AI systems themselves can become those teachers. Because a big reason that GPT is going to be or AI is going to be so good at doing the tier one and tier two analyst is because they're piecing together all the stuff from Workday and Slack and the CrowdStrike logs and the Wiz stuff and AWS and just smashing that all together and holding it in its mind. Whereas if it were to say to a tier one like recruit, hey, here's all the context I'm using to make a decision. What decision would you make if you had all this context? Right? Because a lot of the work that they would be doing is going to track all of those things down, which might take them 3 hours or 5 hours or 10
Mm,
hours.
mm.
So I think there could be sort of tutorials maybe built into the system to try to build this pipeline. And maybe that's even better than it would have been before.
Yeah, yeah, I think the training angle would be very interesting. I think I saw that Khan Academy or some sort of education service is experimenting with LLM based tutors that can sort of, uh, unlike a real person tutor who has sort of limited availability, it's like you can ask them questions at any time. They can maybe give you hints or tips in increasing level of specificity. They could even perhaps over time understand, like, oh, like these are the types of things that make this person frustrated, or they like very short and concise answers versus someone else may want really verbose, give me all the information, like give me like
Yep.
2 pages on this or something. um yeah, uh I do think large consulting firms have a very interesting unique data source in that they have hundreds or thousands of prior pen test reports from a broad variety of companies. So like for me, something that would be really cool is you're testing an application, you're in Burp Suite, something's like a file upload functionality or something, and you're a junior pen tester, and you're like, okay, like what are the things I should test for like file upload? And it's like, well, based on like say the OWASP testing guide or ASVS or every file upload vulnerability this pen testing firm has ever found on any client, like
Yep.
here's like the distilled list of like 5 or 10 things that you should try. And maybe even based on like the HTTP request and response, it's like, and this one maybe seems like the most likely to try because it doesn't look like they're checking file extension or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree.
So yeah, I think um, that would be sort of leaning into the like I guess like data moat angle,
Yeah.
where if you were like a boutique small firm, you wouldn't have as much prior data as like a large player.
Yeah. And that's a great point you bring up. I think it's one of the ways people are going to be able to compete. So if you look at the SPQA model, that state one, if you have better state or better questions, that's how you're going to differentiate. And that's a good example of like whatever KPMG could be like, we have better state because we have collected all this different stuff. Google could make that claim. Lots of people who have been collecting data for a long time could sort of make that claim. And of course, they'd have to have the existing pipelines to keep that data fresh. One of the sort of concerns a lot of people have is like, what happens when we start training LLMs on LLM output? You know,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's like the snake eating its own tail. It's like that could get pretty crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I saw some reports about that. That yeah, like subsequent versions or updated versions of models were based on the output of like previous advanced models. So you can imagine if that was effective, then that would I guess counter the like running out of data problem, where they're like, cool, we can always make them better because we have infinite data. We just sort of generate it for ourselves, which is
Hmm.
kind of crazy to think about.
Yep.
Uh, all right, so let's shift to just a few quick closing ideas or questions that I was curious about. So going back a little bit, big picture, I'm curious, how do you feel about the likelihood of AI being a existential risk to humanity? I thought we'd end on a light note. So
Yeah, the small stuff. Okay.
yeah,
I
yeah,
would say I don't really know the answer to this. When I watch like Eliezer Yudkowsky, it freaks me out a lot. I've heard counter arguments to that. When I was watching him, I was thinking it was like 70 to 90%. Okay. And that community definitely thinks it's that high or higher. And on the optimist side, I would say they consider it still to be a really huge threat, like a 5 to 10% or 20% or something like that. I would put myself more in like a 20 to 50%, I would say. I don't know. I'm I'm just aware of all the different biases that are bouncing around in my head. So I don't really trust anything that I would say with these numbers. Because I'm biased a little towards optimism, but I'm also a security person and I'm like, oh, this is going to go sideways. It's going to be horrible. So it's like I've got these conflicting things. So I would put it somewhere below 50%, but very high. Un- like unacceptably high, but there's not much we could do about it because everyone's running at full speed because of the Malik problem, which I've talked about before.
yeah, yeah. I was going to bring that up. Do you want to quickly? We can link in the show notes, but yeah, if you want to quickly reference what the Moloch problem is, because I think
Yeah,
it's very fascinating.
yeah, it's cool. It's basically this idea that the most dangerous problem in the world is this Moloch idea, which is that when somebody sees something so attractive and they feel compelled to sprint towards it, but they know it will be everyone's destruction if everyone does the same thing. It's almost like the tragedy of the commons problem, kind of related to it. So a good example would be super intelligent AI. Another example would be nuclear war. Another example would be, I don't know, bioweapons or something. It's like, I have to get it first. So I'm going to run full speed. And then all of a sudden you see a bunch of people neck and neck with you. And you're like, okay, everyone's running towards this at the same time. We're all going to die. And everyone says, yep, this is mutually guaranteed destruction. And then you're like, so you want to stop? And they're like, nope. And so you just keep going. And it's called Moloch. It's a really powerful concept.
Yeah, that's I think one argument people have made against slowing down AI developments in the US. They're like, yeah, like AI safety is important, but also China.
Right.
Like and so which I think is an interesting argument. I have heard um other people argue that China uh is maybe not sprinting as recklessly forward as maybe the rest of the world is because they perhaps maybe don't trust LLMs because they can't fully control it. So perhaps like their people could ask questions and gain information to gain access to information that maybe they don't want them to know or something like that. It's not as easy to like filter and collect as maybe a traditional medium. Um, but even if they are sprinting forward research wise, they're not uh, maybe spreading things as openly as say like OpenAI or Bard or like other players are doing, and that like feedback loop and interaction from people is sort of a competitive moat in allowing them to build things faster.
No,
Um,
it's a really lucky coincidence for the West that this is true in China. I mean, they're taking great measures to stop airdrop because they don't want people airdropping from one phone to another person. Um, because
mm,
that could be sensitive information. So absolutely, they want to slow the release of LLMs, especially these open source LLMs, which can answer all sorts of things. Like that is it. it's a great and interesting point that that will slow down their progress versus the West because they don't want it getting out.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of existential risk, I feel like I'm also uncertain. I feel like I've heard compelling arguments on both sides,
Yep.
um, including people who are very uh, experienced, like lifelong machine learning researchers, like famous in their domain. So it's interesting to have a situation where people who are similarly credentialed and experienced having very different assessment about the likelihood of an outcome. I feel like that in itself is kind of interesting to me. I
Totally.
mean, concerning given the importance of the domain,
Yep.
uh, but um, cool. So, second to last question: do you feel like the advancement of AI and machine learning is going to lead to a utopia or a dystopia?
Um, I would say it's going to head into a trough that looks a lot like a dystopia at first, because, well, I guess the higher level answer is like very similar to good or bad before. They're going to happen at the same time. Um, I would say dystopia a little bit before because so many jobs will be lost. But it's also going to, McKinsey just came out with a report basically saying that productivity is going to skyrocket. So I think we're going to
Hmm.
see tremendous innovation as a result of this, which is going to be really nice and utopia like. But I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. If we are able to pull out of that dip, I think we'll move to something like post capitalism, something more humanity focused, actually, that moves us towards like a utopia type situation. But that's only if we can pull out of that. And if not, it's going to get pretty gross. Let's say China, for example, just won. They won everything. They won the internet. They won the economy. They won. We know what that would look like. It would be all this power of LLMs used for security systems and draconian control of speech and populations. So that's the type of thing we need to avoid.
Yeah, yeah. I think if I were to hypothesize, I agree. I think definitely we already see some people being a lot more effective. We see some job loss already. I think both are likely to accelerate in the near future. Um, yeah, I don't know. This is the thing. I feel like for every technology, for every innovation, whether that be like the even like books going from handwritten to being like typeset. Like a lot of people are like, oh, if anyone can publish, then there's going to be this mass disinformation, and it's going to be like the dissolution of society. And there was actually some, I think maybe short term effects like that. But then, like when you look at broader, you're like, well, more people could read, and like
Yeah,
basically society as a whole got better. So it's, to be honest, it's a little tough for me to say like, so some people are like, oh, it's going to be the same here, like yeah, there's going to be some friction in the short point, but like long term it's going to be good for society. But I don't know, it's not clear to me that uh like you can imagine sufficiently powerful AI could be better at a large swath of tasks than a huge percentage of the population, such that they can contribute little economic value that can't be done quite easily by an LLM. And I guess it's unclear to me whether, given how many people that might be, could they develop skills either leveraging LLMs or just different, not yet swallowed by them, that would allow them to contribute effectively to the economy and support themselves financially. Like
yeah,
I think it's non-obvious to me that that'll happen. Like it could very well happen that there's, I don't know, 30% of people are like, yeah, I can't like contribute to the economy because LMs are just like better than me at everything. I don't know what that percent is or how soon it'll be, but that is a concern I have. But hopefully we can pull out of that trough into a more human-centric system of governance, and I don't know, like spending time with people, doing creative activities, I don't know, supporting each other, doing things that feel good and are meaningful and make people happy.
totally agree.
All right, final question. So we've been, maybe saying a little bit, but so
Mhm.
what do you recommend security professionals do going forward?
I recommend they get really good at using these AI tools and sort of up level their thinking into the business and into the higher level goals of what they're trying to accomplish so that they could basically use these tools to guide them about easier fixes. So rather than focus on like assemble this or build this or do that, a lot of those actual execution tasks are going to be done by AI. The real question is what you tell the AI to do. So I think this applies to security people especially, but it applies to really everyone. It's like you've got to get really good at knowing what should be done more so than exactly how to do it because AI is going to get really good at that last part.
That makes a lot of sense. Uh, well, Daniel, my friend, it's been a pleasure hanging out as always. Thanks so much for your time. So where can people find you? Seeing you share other awesome thoughts on AI and other matters.
Yeah, so main site is danielmiessler.com. Twitter is Daniel Miessler. And I've got a newsletter called Unsupervised Learning.
Which I'm a huge fan of, and I look forward to every week. So thanks for writing it.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
For sure. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. You can also find me on Twitter at Clint Gibbler or the newsletter I write, tldrsec.com. But have a great rest of your day and talk soon.